Victoria Sterling collapsed during her video conference with the board of directors, her perfectly manicured hand clutching her chest as she gasped for air. The laptop screen flickered with concerned faces of executives calling her name, but she couldn't respond. Her vision blurred, her head pounded like a sledgehammer, and for a terrifying moment, she thought this might be it, the end of everything she'd built. What she didn't know was that David Thompson, the quiet cleaning man who worked in her mansion twice a week, had been watching her decline for months. And what he was about to discover would save her life, and change both of theirs forever. Before we continue, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Type your city or country in the comments below. And if stories about unexpected heroes and life-changing kindness inspire you, make sure you're subscribed and tap that notification bell so you never miss a new Lunio story. But to understand how a billionaire CEO and a single father cleaning houses became unlikely allies, we need to go back 3 months earlier, to when Victoria's mysterious illness first began stealing her strength, her clarity, and slowly, her empire. Victoria had always prided herself on control. At 48, she commanded Sterling Investment Group from her sprawling Georgian mansion in Buckhead, Atlanta's most exclusive neighborhood. The 8,000-square-foot estate, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, served as both her sanctuary and her office. Floor-to-ceiling windows in her mahogany-paneled study overlooked manicured gardens that cost more to maintain than most people's annual salaries. But control was slipping through her fingers like sand. "The Henderson portfolio needs immediate attention," she said into her headset, squinting at the computer screen. The numbers seemed to swim before her eyes, and she pressed her fingertips to her temples. Another headache. The third one this week. Her assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. "Victoria, are you feeling all right? You sound—" "I'm fine," Victoria snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. She wasn't fine. She hadn't been fine for weeks. The headaches were getting worse, accompanied by a bone-deep fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. Her thoughts felt wrapped in cotton, and sometimes she forgot words mid-sentence during important calls, something that had never happened before in her razor-sharp career. 3 different doctors had run every test imaginable. Blood work, MRIs, stress evaluations, everything came back normal. Executive burnout, they said. Easy for them to say. They didn't understand that slowing down meant watching everything she'd built crumble. Victoria ended the call and leaned back in her leather chair, closing her eyes. The silence of the big house pressed around her like a weight. No husband. Richard had left 3 years ago, tired of playing second fiddle to her ambition. No children at home. Her daughter Sarah lived in Seattle and called maybe once a month, their conversations stilted and brief. Just Victoria, her empire, and an illness that was slowly stealing both. The soft sound of a key turning in the front door interrupted her thoughts. Tuesday meant David Thompson and his cleaning service. She glanced at the clock. 6 p.m. exactly. The man was nothing if not punctual. Victoria had hired Thompson's small cleaning company 8 months ago after her previous service had proven unreliable. He was quiet, thorough, and invisible. Exactly what she wanted. She barely noticed him moving through the house with his supplies, methodically working through each room while she conducted business. What she didn't realize was that David noticed everything. David Thompson pulled his cleaning supplies from the back of his 10-year-old Honda Civic, the same car that had carried him through 2 jobs every day for the past 2 years. At 41, he moved with the careful efficiency of a man who couldn't afford to waste time or energy. Every motion was calculated, every minute accounted for. "Stay close, Sophia," he called softly to his 9-year-old daughter, who sat in the passenger seat with a book and a small bag of crackers. Sophia looked up from her book, a library copy of Charlotte's Web that she'd read 3 times already. "Can we go to Murphy's Diner after?" David's chest tightened. Murphy's diner meant $8 for Sophia's meal, money he'd planned to put toward the electric bill, but the hope in her eyes made the decision for him. Sure, sweetheart. He'd been cleaning houses for 2 years now, ever since his back injury ended his construction career. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was honest work that let him be home when Sophia got out of school, most days anyway. The Sterling mansion always made him feel small. Not because of its size, he'd worked construction on houses just as grand, but because of what it represented. The kind of security he'd never be able to give Sophia. The kind of life where an $8 dinner wasn't a financial calculation. But David had learned not to resent his clients. Everyone had their struggles, even people who lived in houses with more bathrooms than his apartment had rooms. As he approached the front door, he noticed something that made him pause. Through the study window, he could see Victoria Sterling slumped in her chair, her face pale and drawn. She was rubbing her temples with both hands, her usual perfect posture replaced by the defeated slouch of someone in pain. It was the 3rd time in 2 weeks he'd seen her like this. David's late wife, Maria, had been a nurse before cancer took her. She'd taught him to notice things, the way someone held their head when they had a migraine, the particular exhaustion that came with chronic illness, the signs that someone was suffering even when they tried to hide it. Victoria Sterling was suffering. He let himself in quietly, as always, and began his routine. But tonight, something felt different. Tonight, he found himself paying attention to details he'd previously ignored. The way Victoria's coffee cup sat untouched on her desk, growing cold. The prescription bottles lined up on her bathroom counter, more than there had been last week. The way she moved through the house like she was walking through water, each step requiring tremendous effort. And something else. Something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The smell. It was faint, almost undetectable, but David's construction background had taught him to notice chemical odors. There was something in the air of the house, particularly strong in Victoria's study and bedroom. Something that reminded him of the renovation projects where they'd had to wear masks. Something that shouldn't be in a home where people lived and breathed. As David worked, a memory surfaced. Maria in her hospital bed, weak from chemotherapy, telling him about the patients she'd seen over the years. "Sometimes," she'd whispered, "the sickness isn't coming from inside." David paused in his cleaning, a terrible possibility beginning to form in his mind. What if Victoria Sterling's mysterious illness wasn't mysterious at all? What if something in this beautiful, expensive house was slowly poisoning her? And what if he was the only one who could see it? The next Tuesday, David arrived with a small notebook tucked into his cleaning supplies. He'd spent the week researching symptoms of environmental illness, staying up late after Sophia went to bed, reading medical websites and construction safety manuals by the light of his phone. Everything pointed to the same conclusion: toxic exposure. "Ms." he called softly as he entered the house. Usually, she barely acknowledged his presence, but today she didn't respond at all. He found her in the study, slumped over her desk, unconscious. "Ms." David dropped his supplies and rushed to her side, checking for a pulse. It was there, but weak and rapid. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow. He should call 911. He should stay out of it. He should remember his place. Instead, David gently shook her shoulder. "Ms." Victoria's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "You passed out." She struggled to sit up, her hands shaking. "No hospitals. I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. David could see it in the way her hands trembled, the way she couldn't quite focus on his face, the way she seemed to be fighting just to stay conscious. "Ms. Sterling," he said carefully, "when did you have work done on this house?" She blinked at him, as if surprised he was still there. "The smell in here, it's chemical, like formaldehyde or something worse." Victoria's brow furrowed. 6 months ago, the study and master bedroom, new flooring, built-in shelving. Her voice trailed off as understanding began to dawn in her eyes. David pressed gently. I don't know. The contractor said they were eco-friendly, but she looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. David nodded slowly. I think it's possible. My wife was a nurse. She used to tell me about patients who got sick from their environment. Toxic materials, poor ventilation, chemical off-gassing. For a long moment, Victoria stared at him. Here was her cleaning man, someone she'd barely noticed for 8 months, suggesting something that 3 expensive doctors had missed. She asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them. David thought about Sophia waiting in the car, about the electric bill, about all the reasons he should just clean the house and leave. The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Victoria studied David's face, really looked at him for the first time in 8 months. She saw the concern in his weathered features, the way his calloused hands fidgeted with worry, the genuine care of someone who had nothing to gain by helping her. You really think, she began, then stopped. Her beautiful home, her sanctuary, slowly killing her? The idea seemed impossible, and yet her body told another story. I think it's worth checking, David said gently. There are people who test for this kind of thing. Victoria's phone buzzed on her desk, another missed call from her assistant. The business world didn't stop for mysterious illnesses or concerned cleaning men. But for the first time in months, Victoria ignored it. I wouldn't know where to start, she admitted. David pulled out his phone, the screen cracked but functional. I've been researching. There's a doctor in Atlanta, Dr. Rachel Kim. She specializes in environmental toxicology, indoor air quality. You researched this? The surprise in her voice made David's chest tighten. When was the last time someone had been surprised by kindness? My daughter Sophia. She's been asking why you always look so sad when we come here. Victoria's eyes widened. Sometimes. David's face flushed. In the car. Without another word, Victoria stood on unsteady legs and walked to the window. In the driveway sat David's old Honda, and in the passenger seat, a small girl with dark hair bent over a book. Bring her inside, Victoria said quietly. Ms. She turned to face him, and David saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Vulnerability. David hesitated, then nodded. He returned minutes later with Sophia, who clutched her library book and stayed close to her father's side. Sophia, this is Ms. Sterling, David said softly. Sophia looked up at Victoria with the direct, unfiltered gaze that only children possess. Are you feeling better? Victoria knelt down to Sophia's eye level, a gesture that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. I have been sick, sweetheart. Daddy's really smart, Sophia said matter-of-factly. He knows about lots of things. He helped Mrs. Victoria glanced at David. Carbon monoxide leak, David explained. Small one, but dangerous. Just like here, Sophia added. Out of the mouths of babes. Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with her illness. A 9-year-old had noticed what 3 doctors had missed. Sophia nodded, and Victoria led them to the kitchen, a room she rarely used, preferring to have meals delivered to her study. As she poured apple juice into a crystal glass that probably cost more than David made in a day, she found herself really looking at this child. Sophia was small for 9, with intelligent eyes and careful manners. Her clothes were clean but clearly second-hand, her shoes worn but polished. She sat at the marble island like she was afraid to touch anything, but her gaze took in everything with quiet curiosity. Victoria asked, Charlotte's Web. Sophia paused, thinking. Victoria's throat tightened. When was the last time she'd had a real conversation with a child? When was the last time anyone had looked at her with such open, uncomplicated kindness? Sophia, David said gently, why don't you read in the living room while Ms. After Sophia left, Victoria turned to David. Dr. Kim, I think she's worth calling, but... David hesitated. Environmental testing isn't cheap, and if there is something wrong with the house, fixing it could cost... Money isn't the issue, Victoria said quickly. Then, more quietly, I need to know if you're right. David nodded and pulled up Dr. Kim's number on his phone. Victoria stared at the phone, then at this man who had no reason to care about her well-being, who was risking his job by even suggesting her expensive home might be toxic. A man who brought his daughter to work because he couldn't afford childcare, who researched medical conditions on his own time, who noticed things that trained professionals had missed. Yes, she said. But as David dialed, Victoria's phone rang. Her assistant's name flashed on the screen, along with 3 missed calls from board members. I have to take this, she said apologetically, answering. Victoria, thank God. Her assistant's voice was tight with panic. The Morrison deal is falling apart. They're saying you missed 2 critical calls yesterday, and the contract has errors that don't make sense. Victoria's blood ran cold. Her capacity. They were questioning whether she was mentally fit to run her own company. I'll call Morrison back immediately, she said. Victoria, there's more. Someone leaked to the financial press that you've been struggling. There are rumors about your health, your decision-making. The stock price dropped 12% this morning. The phone slipped from Victoria's trembling hands, clattering onto the marble counter. Everything she'd built, everything she'd sacrificed for, was crumbling because of an illness no one could explain. David caught the phone before it hit the floor. Ms. She looked at him through tears she didn't remember starting to cry. They think I'm losing my mind. You're not incompetent, David said firmly. You're sick. Is there? David's voice was steady, certain. Victoria stared at him. If the house is poisoning you, staying here while we wait for test results will only make you worse. You need to go somewhere else. The idea of leaving her sanctuary, her control center, sent panic shooting through her chest. I can't. My business. We'll still be there tomorrow, David said quietly. From the living room came Sophia's voice, reading aloud to herself. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. Victoria closed her eyes. A true friend. When was the last time she'd had one of those? She looked at David, really looked at him. This man who had nothing, who was risking everything, who was offering her something no amount of money could buy, someone who cared enough to speak the truth. Okay, she whispered. As you're listening to this, think about it for a second. If you were in Victoria's place, would you believe the quiet cleaner over 3 expensive doctors? Let me know in the comments whose warning you would have trusted. And keep watching, because what happens next takes this story from personal crisis to full-blown scandal. What she didn't know was that leaving the house was only the beginning, or that what Dr. Kim would discover would change not just her health, but everything she thought she knew about trust, friendship, and what it meant to truly see another person. Dr. Rachel Kim arrived at the Sterling mansion the next morning with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Air quality monitors, chemical detection devices, and sampling kits filled 2 large cases as she methodically worked through each room. Victoria had spent the night at the Four Seasons downtown, and for the first time in months, she'd slept through the night without waking up gasping for air. The difference was so stark, it was almost frightening. David met Dr. Kim at the house, Sophia once again waiting in the car with her book. He'd taken the morning off from his other cleaning jobs, time he couldn't afford to lose, but somehow couldn't afford not to take. The readings are off the charts in the study and master bedroom, Dr. Kim said, her voice grim as she checked her instruments. Formaldehyde levels are nearly 10 times what's considered safe for long-term exposure. David asked, though he suspected he already knew. It means this house is a toxic environment, Dr. Kim replied. Anyone spending significant time here, especially in those 2 rooms, would develop serious health problems, headaches, cognitive impairment, respiratory issues, chronic fatigue. All of Ms. Sterling's symptoms. Dr. Kim nodded. The question is, what's causing it? They found their answer in the study. Behind the beautiful built-in mahogany shelving, Dr. Kim's instruments detected the source. The adhesives and sealants used in the recent renovation contained dangerous levels of formaldehyde and other chemicals. Worse, the contractor had installed them without proper ventilation, essentially sealing in the fumes. "This is criminal negligence," Dr. Kim said, photographing everything. "Whoever did this work used materials that have been banned in commercial buildings for years." David's hands clenched into fists. "They knew," Dr. Kim murmured. The answer came when Victoria arrived an hour later, looking more alert than David had seen her in months. She brought with her a folder of documents from the renovation. "Pinnacle Construction," she read from the contract. "They came highly recommended." Dr. Kim's expression darkened. "I know that company. They've been investigated before for using substandard materials in high-end homes." Victoria asked, her voice thin. "They probably didn't care if you got sick," Dr. Kim said bluntly. "They cared about profit margins. Toxic materials are cheaper, and wealthy clients who get sick usually just move to another house or hire more doctors." Victoria sank into a chair in the kitchen, the only room with acceptable air quality readings. "And they would have gotten away with it if David hadn't noticed the connection," Dr. Kim added. Victoria looked at David, who was standing quietly by the window, watching Sophia in the car. Victoria's voice was firm. "3 more months in that study and—" She didn't finish the sentence. Dr. Kim packed up her equipment. "I'll have the full report ready by tomorrow, but you'll need to stay out of the house until it's completely remediated. We're talking about stripping out all the recent work, proper ventilation installation, and extensive decontamination." After Dr. Kim left, Victoria and David stood in the kitchen, the weight of the discovery settling between them. "I need to call my lawyer," Victoria said. "Good," David said simply. "And I need to call my assistant, let the board know what's been happening. Maybe now they'll understand." She stopped mid-sentence, staring at David. "You could have just cleaned the house and left," David asked quietly. Victoria thought about that. A week ago, she would have said yes. A week ago, she barely noticed the people who cleaned her house, delivered her food, maintained her perfect life. They were invisible, interchangeable, unimportant. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe that's something you could learn," David said. The simple statement hung in the air, not a judgment, just a possibility. "David," Victoria said slowly, "what you did, it cost you time, research, worry. You risked your job by getting involved." David was quiet for a long moment, looking out at Sophia. "When my wife was dying, she was in the hospital for weeks. The nurses, the orderlies, the cleaning staff, they were the ones who really took care of her. Not because they had to, but because they saw her." His voice grew thick. "One night, when Maria was having a really bad time, this janitor, this old guy named Frank, he sat with her for 2 hours during his break. Just sat there and held her hand while she cried. He didn't know us. We couldn't do anything for him." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "Frank probably saved my wife's last weeks from being pure hell. And when I saw you suffering, alone in that big house, I kept thinking about Frank. I never even knew your last name until yesterday," Victoria whispered. "Thompson. David Thompson." The casual mention of their financial struggles hit Victoria like a physical blow. Here was a man who couldn't afford books for his daughter, spending his free time researching her medical condition. "David, I want to—" "Don't," he said gently. "Don't offer me money. Not yet." But Victoria was already thinking beyond money. She was thinking about Pinnacle Construction, about how many other people they might have poisoned. She was thinking about David's intelligence, his integrity, his ability to see what others missed. And she was thinking about something else, something that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. He looked at her curiously. "Nothing," Because I think Pinnacle Construction has done this before. What Victoria didn't know was that her decision to fight back would uncover a conspiracy that reached far beyond one corrupt contractor, and that the quiet cleaning man who had saved her life was about to become the most important ally she'd ever had. But first, they had to survive what Pinnacle Construction would do when they realized their secret was out. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later. David was cleaning Mrs. Patterson's house in Brookhaven when his phone rang. The voice on the other end was cold, professional, and terrifying. "Mr. Thompson, this is Bradley Walsh from Pinnacle Construction." David's blood turned to ice. "I think you do, and I think you should know that making false accusations against a legitimate business can have serious legal consequences." The threat was clear, poor, unconnected, easy to crush. David looked around Mrs. Patterson's modest living room, thinking about Sophia at school, about the bills piling up on his kitchen table, about how easily a man like him could be destroyed by a company with lawyers and money. "I haven't made any accusations," David said carefully. "Good. Let's keep it that way. Oh, and Mr. Thompson? I'd be very careful about who you associate with." The line went dead. David's hands were shaking as he called Victoria. She answered on the first ring, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "David, how are you feeling about—" "They called me," he interrupted. "Pinnacle Construction." Silence. David repeated the conversation word for word. When he finished, Victoria's voice was ice-cold fury. "They threatened Sophia," she said. Victoria's tone was one David had never heard before, the voice of a woman who had built an empire and wasn't afraid to use it. "Mrs. Stay there. Victoria, I can't just leave." "Yes, you can. Pack a bag for you and Sophia." An hour later, David found himself in the back of a black sedan with Sophia beside him, both of them staring out at a world that had suddenly become dangerous. The driver, a serious man in a dark suit, said nothing as they drove through Atlanta's afternoon traffic. Sophia asked quietly, "To see Ms. Sterling." They pulled up to a gleaming office building downtown. Victoria met them in the lobby, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who radiated the kind of quiet authority that came with serious money and serious power. "David, Sophia," Victoria said, her voice warm despite the tension in her eyes. She led them to a conference room on the 40th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Sophia pressed her nose to the glass, momentarily forgetting their circumstances. "These are my attorneys," Victoria said, gesturing to the 2 men. "James Morrison and Paul Chen," David repeated. Morrison, a silver-haired man with sharp eyes, opened a thick folder. "We've been investigating Pinnacle Construction since yesterday." He spread photographs across the conference table. Houses, apartments, office buildings, all beautiful, all expensive, all toxic. 17 properties in the Atlanta area alone, Chen added, all renovated by Pinnacle in the last 3 years, all using the same substandard toxic materials. David stared at the photos. "At minimum, we're still investigating," Morrison said. "The pattern is always the same. Low bid, promises of eco-friendly materials, shoddy installation that maximizes toxic exposure." David asked. Victoria answered, "Because wealthy people don't usually live in their houses 24/7. They travel, they have multiple homes, they spend time at offices and clubs. The exposure is slower, more gradual. Plus," Chen added, "wealthy clients are less likely to suspect their expensive renovation is the problem." Sophia had wandered over to a bookshelf in the corner, running her fingers along the spines. Victoria noticed and walked over to her. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria pulled a book from the shelf, a beautiful hardcover edition of The Secret Garden. Sophia's eyes went wide. David started to protest, but Victoria held up a hand. "It's just a book, David." But it wasn't just a book, and they all knew it. It was a gesture of care, of seeing Sophia as more than just the cleaning man's daughter. It was Victoria learning what David had tried to teach her, that everyone mattered. Morrison cleared his throat. "We need to discuss the threat against Mr. Victoria asked, her voice sharp. "Pinnacle has a history of intimidating witnesses," Morrison said. "Nothing violent on record, but they're very good at making people's lives difficult. Lost jobs, credit problems, legal harassment." David swallowed. "You won't have to," Victoria said firmly. "As a consultant, environmental safety specialist." David stared at her. She interrupted gently. "Accept a job you're qualified for? You identified a toxic environment that 3 doctors missed. You understand construction materials and their health impacts. But I'm not..." "You're not what? Educated enough? Rich enough?" Victoria shook her head. "David, you saved my life." Sophia looked up from her new book. The innocent question hit the room like a thunderbolt. David's face flushed with embarrassment, but Victoria knelt down to Sophia's level. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. But even as Victoria spoke, she was thinking about more than David's financial security. She was thinking about the 17 families who had been poisoned, about the pattern of corporate greed that had nearly killed her, about the system that allowed companies like Pinnacle to prey on people's trust. "There's something else," she said, standing up. "I want to start a foundation." Morrison nodded approvingly. "That's a smart move." "And I want David to run it," Victoria added. The room went silent. David looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "Victoria, I don't know anything about running a foundation," he said. "You know about environmental hazards. You know what it's like to be powerless when someone with money and lawyers threatens you." She paused. Chen leaned forward. "There's something else you should know. We've traced Pinnacle's ownership structure. The company is owned by a shell corporation, which is owned by another shell corporation, which is ultimately owned by..." He paused. "Sterling Investment Group," he finished. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. "Your own investment firm has been funding the company that poisoned you," Chen said. "It's buried deep in a subsidiary portfolio, but the connection is there." Victoria sank into her chair, the full horror of the situation washing over her. She had been slowly killed by her own money, her own success, her own willingness to invest in profitable companies without asking hard questions about how they made their profits. "I funded my own poisoning," she whispered. David reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a week ago. "No," he said firmly. "You were lied to, just like everyone else." Victoria looked at their joined hands, her manicured fingers and his work-worn ones, and felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't facing a crisis alone. "We're going to destroy them," she said quietly. "All of them." But what Victoria didn't know was that Pinnacle Construction had been watching the building, and that their next move would put not just David and Sophia in danger, but everyone Victoria had ever cared about. The war was just beginning. The attack came at 3 a.m., not with violence, but with something far more insidious. David's phone buzzed him awake in the hotel room Victoria had arranged for him and Sophia. The caller ID showed his landlord's number. "Thompson, you need to get over here. Now," Mr. Kowalski said, his voice tense. David asked, sitting up, "Your apartment. Someone broke in, trashed the place." David's blood turned to ice. "Enough cocaine to put you away for years, they're saying. They got an anonymous tip about dealing." David hung up, his hands shaking. He called Victoria immediately. "They planted drugs in my apartment," he whispered when she answered. "Stay where you are," Victoria said, instantly alert. "Do not go back there. I'm calling my lawyers and someone else." But Victoria was already 3 steps ahead. While David paced the hotel room, she was making calls that would change everything. Not to lawyers this time, but to someone far more powerful in a different way. Victoria said into her phone, her voice soft with years of regret. "It's Mom." Her daughter's voice was cautious but not cold. "Mom, are you okay?" "I am different," Victoria said. For the next hour, Victoria told Sarah everything. About the poisoning, about David's courage, about Sophia's innocent wisdom, about the conspiracy that had nearly killed her and was now threatening the man who had saved her. "I want to be that person again," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "But first I need your help. You're an investigative journalist." The next morning, the story broke like a thunderclap. Toxic Empire, how one company poisoned America's elite, dominated headlines from coast to coast. Sarah's detailed investigation laid everything bare. The toxic renovations, the shell companies, the threats, the planted drugs, and the trail that led straight back to Sterling Investment Group's portfolio. By noon, Pinnacle Construction's offices were surrounded by federal agents. By evening, Bradley Walsh and 6 other executives were in handcuffs, charged with fraud, criminal negligence, and conspiracy. Unofficially, everyone in that courtroom knew exactly what had happened. 3 weeks later, in a small courtroom in downtown Atlanta, a 16-year-old girl named Emma Henderson took the witness stand. Her family had been one of Pinnacle's victims. A star athlete before the renovation, she now walked with a cane. "The worst part wasn't being sick," Emma said clearly. "It was thinking it was my fault somehow, like I wasn't strong enough or I did something wrong, but I wasn't broken. I was poisoned." When Victoria testified, she spoke not as a CEO, but as a woman who had nearly lost everything. "David Thompson saved my life twice," she said. "Once by recognizing that my house was poisoning me." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. Pinnacle's executives received long prison sentences. The shell companies were dismantled. Sterling Investment Group faced massive fines and regulatory scrutiny, but under Victoria's leadership it cooperated fully, paying out compensation to victims and divesting from any company that couldn't meet strict ethical and environmental standards. 6 months later, Victoria sat in what had once been her toxic study, now transformed into a bright community library and resource center. Sunlight poured through the windows. Air purifiers hummed softly in the background. The walls were lined with books and educational displays about indoor air quality and environmental safety. The house that had nearly killed her was now a center for healing and advocacy. David reviewed grant applications at a table by the window while Sophia read in a corner chair, one of dozens of books Victoria had given her. "The Henderson family wants to start a support group for teens with environmental illness," David said, looking up from a proposal. Victoria smiled. "Approved." Sophia looked up from her book. "Ms. "I don't know, sweetheart," Victoria said honestly. Sophia asked. "Like your daddy did for me," Victoria replied. As evening light faded through the windows, Victoria looked around the room that had once been her prison and was now her sanctuary. The same space where she'd nearly died alone was now filled with laughter, purpose, and the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars. Sometimes the person who saves your life is the one you never bothered to see. Sometimes the greatest wealth comes not from what you accumulate, but from what you're willing to give away. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, a house built to isolate you becomes the foundation for bringing people together. The most valuable thing you can invest in isn't a portfolio or a property. It's the simple act of seeing another person's pain and choosing to care. What did you think of this story? Have you ever had someone unexpected change your life, like David did for Victoria, or like Frank did for Maria? Share your experience in the comments. I read as many as I can, and your story might inspire someone else watching. If this story restored even a little bit of your faith in humanity, don't forget to like this video so more people can find it. And if you believe the world needs more stories of kindness, courage, and second chances, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new Lunio story.